Hey church, welcome to the Pack Bible Podcast with Glenn Power, a weekly podcast to help guide and encourage you as you read through the Bible this fall. So grab the Bible reading plan from the show notes, and let's jump in.
I heard faith's gone out of fashion, at least according to my old friends. Guess I've never been one to keep up with the modern trends, 'cause maybe I'm out of style, but whether or not that's true, when I look at this star, it's all I see.
But Junie was like,
is you.
what does it mean that it's pretty like a devil? I go, that's not a nice thing to say.
We don't listen to that part of the lyric.
Devils are not pretty, and we don't say that.
Yeah.
That's definitely a fun part of parenting is like, Dad, why did he do that? It's like, well, son, it's a movie.
It's bad.
It's just for fun. No one really does that in real life.
All right. Does it sound okay? I think that is a lot better right there.
Check.
Boom.
Is
Okay.
this is the volume good?
Yeah,
Yeah, you
Do
sound
I-
great.
Do I stay this close, or is it too?
you're good there. Yeah.
Okay. All right. This is the first real session of the Radiant Pack Bible. Wait, what did we decide to call it?
The Pack Bible Podcast.
Pack Bible Podcast. Okay, yeah. So this is the first real session of that. So the packs here at Radiant are going through a Bible reading plan. They're reading through the book of Exodus in the Old Testament, one psalm a day, and they're reading through Mark. So and it's just starting this week, actually. So they're going to go through about 5 chapters each of those books. And this podcast is meant just to create a sense of community. So I'm Glenn, by the way, me and a different guest each week will come together and just talk about the chapters. We'll talk about what stuck out to us, what was exciting, what was confusing, and we'll just model a discussion about the word. We're not able to do a summary of each chapter of the Bible that we're reading. That's just too much content. It's about 15 chapters a week. But I would recommend, if you want something like that, a little synopsis or summary of every chapter, to check out the Bible Recap podcast with Tara Lee Cobble. That's a really good one, and that's exactly what she does in a really short and accessible way. So today, our guest is the man behind the camera himself, Forrest Cavelli.
Hello, hello.
So I'm gonna interview Forrest about the reading, and actually we have another guest here today as well, Mike Salazar.
Hello, hello.
Okay,
Keeping it consistent.
and in the following week we're gonna interview Mike. So, but yeah, all three of us are just gonna talk about this. So, but before we get into it, it's just a fun way to start. Forrest, what's something about you that most people don't know?
Man. You want something that's like funny, interesting?
Yeah, make us laugh, circus boy.
That's my thing. You remember those really terrible commercials, the farmersonly.com
Oh yeah,
commercials that were out for
I know where
years
this is
there?
going.
Yeah, I made most of those.
So you made them. Oh, I thought you were going to say you were in them.
No, I made those.
Okay,
Yeah,
but that's
kind
why
of.
we had a lot of friends that were in them, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Matt Sampietro wrote a lot of them and starred in a lot of them. And
Okay.
Yeah, that was one of my clients, and that was one of the weirdest things I've ever experienced.
Did you ever hear, feedback about like people meeting their farmer dates because of your commercials? Are there any marriages that happened because of those commercials?
There's a ton because of Farmers Only itself. I don't know how much my commercials were specifically involved.
They don't come back and thank you personally.
No.
For their marriage.
No.
That's a shame.
Yeah, it
They
is.
should.
They owe me that.
Okay. So let's jump into this. So I think I already said the chapters that we read today, that we are going to read this week. So Forrest, as you read Exodus, Mark, Psalms, what was a question you had? Maybe something that was confusing. Yeah.
So there's a bunch. And as I started reading this and journaling, I had to slow myself down. Every second verse, I was like, "Oh, that I want to ask that. Oh, what is that in there?" You know. So my journal was filling up, and I was like, "I gotta land one of these, and I gotta bring it in."
Hey, quick question, because this I think will be helpful to people.
Yep.
When you make notes, do you write them in a journal as you're reading the Bible?
Yeah.
I think that's a great practice.
Yep. So, a lot of, and I'll have to maybe pre-apologize for this. A lot of what I write in my journal is questions. Hey, why is that? I need to ask somebody why that's there. Like, that's really curious. I need to figure out why Jesus responded like that. That's confusing. So I wish it was more praise. You're so good. And that was so amazing. And a lot of it's like, man, that's really interesting. And I'm curious why that happened. I think maybe it's just more of my inquisitive nature on those fronts, but that's what you're going to get here out of my journal.
That's great.
So
we love it. So you write in your journal. Some people write in the margins of their Bible. All of it's a great way to just kind of clarify your thoughts as you're reading the Bible.
Yep. It's amazing to read back through it, and kind of as you haven't read your journal in a while, and you kind of skim it, and you're like, oh man, like remember what I was going through, and different things, and like it's amazing you read the same passage of scripture over and over again and get something entirely different, and so that's it's quite a journey.
That's really true.
All right, so a question, my favorite one. And we'll see where this leads us, but it was near the beginning of Mark. So first chapter, starting at verse 40, it's Jesus cleansed the leper, right? That story. And as I was reading it, a couple of things stood out to me. Actually, you can maybe scoot back one verse. It was I underlined in the Bible because I write there as well. He went through all Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. So,
where is that? So we're Mark 1, what verse?
Back up to 39.
Okay.
And then to continue on through the rest of chapter 1 to the story of the leper. Yep. So I just kind of had the thought as I was reading 39, I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of a question and a statement. Jesus's primary audience or his primary ministry was towards the Israelites, correct?
Yes.
That was his main focus.
Right.
And so I read that verse in 39 and that kind of popped into my head. And then as I read through the rest of the chapter, it stuck out to me. So he heals the leper.
Yeah.
Then he tells him, hey, don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
And just go back to the priests and tell them. And I'm assuming there was probably a law or he needed to report that he'd been healed and clean so he can kind of re-enter society in a way, right?
Yeah, God made provision for that in the Mosaic law. If somebody is healed, they need to report to the priest, and that's kind of their way to, because if they had leprosy, they had to stay on the outskirts of the community so they wouldn't infect anyone. And there's a symbolic value to that as well. But when they're finally healed, they'd have to check in with the priest to confirm their healing for one thing. But then second of all, then the priest could then introduce them back into the community.
Yeah, beautiful. So I understand the practicality of saying, go tell the priest. And then I'm just curious why he would, but don't tell anyone else. Yeah. And so as I read through it, because at the end, he was like, well, they found him everywhere. Yeah. He was out in the desolate places and they found him there. Yeah. And so I was like, that feels like he said, don't tell anyone because it's going to screw up my ability to go into the synagogues and to preach to my primary audience. So don't tell anyone because it's actually going to hurt my ministry.
Yeah.
It's kind of what it felt like. And then I thought, that's really strange because as I understand it, or as I think about it, Jesus is omniscient. Mm-hmm. He's God. He knows your thoughts. He knows everything that's going to happen. And it feels like in that verse, he didn't know. He was like hoping, he was really hoping he wouldn't tell everybody.
Yeah.
And wasn't sure that he wasn't, or it's like reverse psychology. It doesn't seem like his nature, right? Like, hey, don't tell anybody. He said, tell everyone.
This is actually the perfect way to spread the message. Yeah, no, probably not.
So yeah,
that's disingenuous. That's probably not how Jesus rolls. Yeah.
So that's my question why would he tell him not to tell everybody? And then is Jesus omniscient? Does he know everything? Because that kind of feels like that verse is leaning in a different
And this is the first question on our podcast. This is so there's two different issues that are going on. They're separated in my mind anyway. The first one is why does Jesus constantly tell people to not tell anyone after they've been healed? And this is actually a huge characteristic of the Gospel of Mark specifically. You see that a little bit in the other Gospels, but Mark really emphasizes this. So this is what scholars call the Messianic Secret. The fact that Jesus would constantly do these things, and then he would tell people, shh, now don't tell anyone. And it's really bizarre because when you read the Gospels, the idea is, didn't Jesus come to get the message out?
Yeah.
How does it make any sense that he is doing these amazing things, healing and teaching, then telling people to not get the message out? And I think actually the solution is really practical, is that their idea of a Messiah in that day was mostly political, and they perceived the Messiah as a new David who would come in and overthrow the Romans on their behalf. That was their perception of a Messiah. And so if Jesus came in with guns blazing, saying, yeah, I'm the Messiah, and every time somebody healed somebody, just, hey, go tell your friends, get the message out, Messiah's here, then the word would get out that a new David was in town and that Rome was going down. And what would happen is that within days of Jesus's ministry starting, he would be arrested by the authorities and his ministry would stop.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, you're completely right, is that it actually the practical reason was, hey, if you get the word out too soon, and if you get it out in the wrong way with the wrong perception, I'm going to have a 10-day ministry. I'm not going to get 3 years to heal people, to get these world-changing teachings out there. And Jesus wanted that full length of time, that full 3 years for him to define what a Messiah was, that a Messiah actually was going to come to suffer, that a Messiah was actually going to come to save people from their sins, not from the Romans. So that's one issue. That's the Messianic Secret issue. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I don't know if this is like too early to kind of ask this question, but I've heard other preachers preach, or I've heard, not a lot, but I've heard people share about this part too, that he just didn't want it to basically explode, because then it would make it harder for him to go into these towns.
Right.
Like it would be like super Jesus, like showing up and healing people. And there was a big need. So it was a practical way too of just saying, hey, I mean, that's so hard, because if you have leprosy and you get healed, like if I lived in that time and he told me, I'm like, yeah, right, I'm going to tell everybody, like, because that's just how I am, like I would just don't tell me a secret, because I'm going to share it to everybody. But it was like, is that true? Like where that part, and maybe that's where you're going to get to, of like, he didn't want it to explode yet. Like, have you heard that before?
Yeah. That it would get too big, too quick. Yeah, and I think that's another way that it would limit his ministry, and that's exactly what did happen. That there were too many crowds, and the wrong idea of a Messiah was starting to get out there already, and he was limited. Yeah. So it wasn't reverse psychology. He genuinely wanted him to keep it on the down low. Again, Jesus wanted to define the terms.
Yeah.
He wanted to get his teachings out there. He wanted to slowly unveil in his timing what he was there to do and what the kingdom of God was really all about. And because of this guy disobeying him, I mean, it's very understandable, not the worst sin in the world, but because of what he did, there were actually people that Jesus could not heal. It limited Jesus's ministry.
Yeah.
So the second issue I think that's at hand, and this is I think the bigger, really difficult question is, we know that Jesus is fully God and we know that he's fully man. So the question is, we know that God is omniscient. It's just a fancy word that means he knows everything. So when Jesus walked the earth as a man, he was fully God, but was he omniscient all the time? I mean, through his 30-year-old human brain, did he know everything that was happening did he know the thoughts of every single person at all times? And that's a really difficult question, because although we need to hold on to the fact that he was fully God, it's possible that he chose to not use all of his divine attributes. Okay, so it was a choice, but somehow, and I'm speaking hypothetically because we're kind of in the realm of mystery, right? I mean, Jesus being fully God and fully man, there's a lot of questions attached to it, and just so he chose to be dependent on the Father. We see that throughout the Gospels. You know, I only do what I see the Father doing. So even that's him making a choice as a human to be dependent on his Father, and not fully exercising all of his rights as somebody who's fully God. So I think it's very possible that he wasn't omniscient all the time, or at least he voluntarily laid that down for periods of time as a human.
So, man, we could talk about this forever. This is super interesting.
Yeah.
So he's fully God, fully man. And when he came down here, he willingly kind of emptied himself of his divinity, right? That was kind of like...
Yeah, and that's probably not it's semantics. That's probably not the best way to say it, because
sure.
But again, it's super hard to say it right.
Yeah.
And actually, it seems like you gotta like take a lot of theology classes to learn how to say it right.
That's just the first thing that popped into my head there.
Sure.
So yeah, he's willingly saying like, all right, I am God.
He definitely he laid down rights and privileges that came with his divinity.
So then
Philippians 2 talks about that.
He's more than operating. So it'd be what he did know, what was things that was revealed to him through the Spirit then, essentially, which is similar to how we operate.
Exactly.
Now.
He chose to depend on the Spirit and listen to the Spirit the way that we do.
Yes.
Instead of just that, omniscience card, like I know everything all the time. He chose to get a word of knowledge for the person sitting next to him.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So those times when he clearly read someone's mail and could hear their thoughts, that the Holy Spirit was like, hey, this guy's thinking this right now.
Yeah.
And he's like,
he did it in a very human way, that
the same way that our intuition, or, that we could hear the Lord's voice and then act upon it. So
exactly.
Interesting. So in a way we,
and I love how he's always going, like even when there's a ton of stuff to be done and a ton of things that he's probably seen that the Father's showing him. I love that he's always going away. Like he's always saying to the disciples, I need to go away and have time with the Lord. And I think that's a very practical way for us too, to live our lives of like how dependent he is. Like, I think he just modeled that very well. Like, are we going to do it as well as he did it? Probably not, but he modeled and said like our times with God will tap into us and give us those things as well to like follow and do and give those prophetic words. So I just think that kind of popped in my head as you guys were talking.
Yeah.
This is the
good example, his quiet times.
Dude.
Yeah, this is what's so amazing with the Bible. I kind of said it earlier that it's just every single time you read it, there's a new wrinkle. Yeah. And I feel like now I want to go back and read it again with this lens, like reading through and be like, okay, I feel like he maybe didn't know what was going on here. And here he obviously had it figured out. And it's to be really interesting to read through it again with that lens and kind of like view Jesus as something that's more actually, because it's easy to look at the Bible and be like, well, of course he could do that. He's God, and be like, no, he's actually operating just like you in this moment. You have all the same resources that he does.
Yeah. And this is probably a bad analogy, but the image that comes to my mind is a boxer who's 10 times stronger than the other, but he comes in blindfolded and with one arm tied behind his back. Yeah. And that's how he chooses to box, like, does he still have all of his strength? Yeah. He doesn't lose it, but there's this voluntary restraint and this voluntary limitation. Yeah. That's the best way I know how to describe.
All right.
Before we run out of time, I wanted to know, Forrest, what was something that touched your heart? Maybe it's just all questions. That's okay too. So was there something as you read through it that you felt like, man, I can see this in my life. Like I can see how this relates to my life.
So yeah, there's Psalm 1, and I feel bad for the key things I wrote down jumping out to me immediately. Maybe not, but so Psalm 1:1, just the classic verse, and as you go down through it. Which let me skip my way back to that. as I was reading down through that, and I kind of had to stop, and I was like, let me define these words for myself, because it's, I've actually heard a lot of, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. And so I just went through and kind of define those terms. And so it's like basically somebody who gets advice from, takes counsel from unbelievers. Right? Okay, I get that one. And then stands in the way of sinners. Then it feels like there's a progression. So you started off and you're just seeking advice. You're just kind of letting them into your head. And then now you're kind of becoming one of them. You're sitting in the seat of, you're in their seat. You're kind of joining forces with them.
Yeah. That's such a good observation. So this is Psalm 1, verse 1.
Yeah.
The progression goes walk, stand, sit. At least that's in the NIV. And you're pointing out that it's an increased commitment to these ungodly people. First, you're just kind of walking with them, kind of half-hearted. Then you're standing with them. You're stopping what you're doing. But by the end of it, you are full on sitting with them, and you are one of them.
Yeah, you're joining in this case, like the scoffers, that you're joining in mocking God, or you're joining in going in the wrong direction. And so as I was thinking through that, I just it popped into my head some really close friends of mine who have done that. Started off like really on fire for the Lord, going on missions trips and just living really intentionally in that way. But then when they returned from doing those things, they walk this path. They started off just by getting a lot of non-Christian friends, and then by then kind of like aligning themselves with them, and then eventually just kind of walking away from their faith entirely and joining them. It's such this huge 180.
Yeah. And
so it just kind of struck me that like, this is what this is talking about. And like, I've seen that play out in my own life, and I can see how that would affect me. And that was it's a personal anecdote. I do have a question. How much time do we got left in there?
We can do it. This will be our last one.
So, Matt Flummer, kind of our resident philosopher, very interesting, intelligent fella that we have access to, which is amazing. He preached a sermon a while back, talked about echo chambers, right? And so that's kind of, as I read through this, it felt like this is difficult, because it sounds like don't do this, but there's obviously the ability to have non-Christian friends, to do life with them, without having to align with them and then move to the seated and scoffing zone of that. But it feels like part of this, so Matt talks about not being an echo chamber, broadening your sources, right? Those kind of things, and not just only getting your stuff from one source. And this feels like, I think if you're going to be in an echo chamber, let's do it amongst our brothers inside the faith. But it does feel like
it's a nice echo chamber, but it's still an echo chamber is what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was my thought. Like, as I thought through this and thought of my buddy who walked through that and was like, oh man, I wish he wouldn't have done that. But then I immediately thought like, well then isn't this that?
Yeah.
So I was curious you had any.
Yeah, it's great. So usually when you see two truths in the scriptures that seem to be in tension, there's usually a pretty powerful truth in the balance of it. And you have to find the balance of it. And a lot of times it depends on context as well. But so Psalm 1 really is talking about who do you get your wisdom from?
Yeah.
Who are you walking with? Who are you sitting with, in a committed way? And it's warning, rightly so, like the story you gave of your friend. It's warning that when you become more and more committed to this kind of person, and you yoke yourself to them, and those are your best friends, the ones that you share all with, the one that you constantly receive input from, then it's not going to go good. It's going to steal from you. It's going to steal from your faith. You're going to become more like them.
Yep.
Now there's another truth, and this is what it's in tension with. There's another truth that, let's just use Jesus. Jesus ate with sinners.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And so how does Psalm 1 fit with the fact that Jesus intentionally reached out to the tax collectors and the prostitutes? How do those two things go together?
Yep.
And I think Jesus is the perfect answer, because Jesus wasn't really doing what Psalm 1 is talking about. Jesus was reaching out to them, but Jesus knew who he was. And Jesus actually had a close crew of people that he was walking with in an intimate way. he wasn't sitting down with the tax collector and the prostitute and saying, hey, tell me about, how you cheated and got more money off of that last deal. Like, that's really interesting. Maybe that's not so bad. I mean, Jesus had his convictions intact.
Yes.
And so really, I think because this is something that we talk about in gap year, because I see a lot, gap year is our college age program, discipleship school that we have at Radiant. And I see a lot of young people get off track because of who they hang out with. And so I emphasize the Psalm 1 truth. But then I have to say, I'm not saying to not have friends that are not unbelievers. But what it comes down to is, where do you go when you need wisdom? Yeah. Do you go to people that don't know God? That's not a good thing. Where do you go when you're suffering? Like, do you have people that you can ask prayer from? And so I believe every believer needs to have an intimate circle, just like Jesus did, where you can be vulnerable. You can just pour out your heart, and what you can expect back from them is something that honors God and something that is wise. Yeah. And once you have that intact, it's great to reach out, to spend time with family members and friends that don't know the Lord. But you need that inner circle to keep you solid and keep you steady. And 9 times out of 10, the people who are taken off track, it's because they don't have a safe inner circle. Their very best friends, the ones that they're yoked with, are the Psalm 1 people that don't know God.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Totally.
I like verse 2 though. It says, but he delights in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. I think for me, this speaks to like, because I think there's other people too that say, well, like, I don't do those things. I don't sit with sinners, but it's like, for me, I'm a big podcast guy, and it's like the things that I listen to, the things that want to influence me, like other just things that I listen to right in our culture. And I think for me, the part that I take from this is like my source on like what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is, even the good things, like the things that are important to my life should come from the model that God has given me, his law. Like that is for me the measure, right? Because I there's times where God in this season is saying, don't listen to that right now. Like that's, you just become a little scoffer in your heart. You kind of start doing those things of taking counsel from specific podcasts when you're like, maybe they are right. And I think God's like saying, be very watchful of that, because it's really sneaky, because again, I mean, this is probably, I go to work with people that don't believe in God, but my community is mostly Radiant. My community is mostly my close Christian friends. But I just think right now, in the time we live in, like technology and the things that are just like a click away, it's like, be very watchful of that,
That's so good. Yeah. And
That's
I'm
good.
sure right now in the particular season we're in, the temptation would be to just listen to a lot of politics, and we really want to be careful that our intake, we have the word as our intake. We're delighting in the law of the Lord. We're meditating on it day and night. And it's okay with that foundation intact. It's okay to listen to some politics on top of that. But man, we want to keep that Psalm 1 verse 2 foundation intact and just keep delighting.
Did you guys read The Wisdom Pyramid, Brett McCracken?
Yes. Yeah.
We talked a lot about that and the houses and different things, but it's just kind of like the proper healthy balance, the main, your base is the word, and that time, and you get up to the top and you have podcasts and social media and those kind of things, but that needs to be one of your smaller intakes.
Yeah.
And
well, let's leave it there and enjoy the word this week, you guys. And keep in mind Psalm 1 as we're talking about, just to keep delighting in the law of the Lord. It's not just discipline. Discipline's awesome, but there's a delight, there's a joy in finding Jesus and encountering him as we read through the scriptures. And hopefully these podcasts are just a model of good Bible conversation you can have during your PAX. You don't need to have Bible experts. You can just talk, hey, what does this mean? Talk about it, and it's going to be really edifying and strengthening. So we will see you guys next week.
See ya. And just like in Psalm 1:1, you should join a pack so you have a proper inner circle.
That was good. Time-wise, I think that was fine. It was a little bit longer, but I thought it was good enough.
given up on you. Oh, I given up on you. I give it up on you.